We're going to start off with an essential phrase for your language learning process. No te rías de mí. Say it with me. No te rías de mí. Or a little bit more how it would be pronounced in PR. No te rías de mí. Drop that S. No te rías de mí. I used this phrase at the beginning of the last episode. Don't laugh at me. I was trying to improve my pronunciation of el 1 de octubre. I've never loved how that word sounds on me. And the second time I tried to pronounce it, it didn't improve all that much. And Alfredo giggled and I said, no te rías de mí. My friends, after having gone through the humiliating experience of being laughed at in my second language, I swore I would never laugh at anybody in their second language. However, it has happened. It has happened to me with Alfredo. Sometimes the word that he uses or a pronunciation, etc., I just laugh. And I can tell you, I've been on the receiving end of it and it sucks and it makes you feel horrible. I've also been on the side that's laughing, and I can tell you it's not something that people do maliciously. They're not thinking that you're an idiot. They're not saying that you can't speak this language. Sometimes a giggle just comes out before you've even had a chance to process it, right? There's things sometimes that people say and you can feel like a little laughter coming up and you just say, no, we're gonna do it. But there are some things that people will say or that little kids say when they're learning their language that the laughter just slips out. And I can promise you that for a lot of people, they do not have a malicious intent by giggling, right? My 3-year-old niece, my sister had asked me if I had heard her yet say the word quiet. And it was just the last time that I was home that we were putting her to bed. And Lauren, my sister, always reminds her in the morning, how are you going to come down? And she said, Karet. Karet. That's how she's pronouncing quiet. And I giggled, right? The same thing might happen for you in Spanish. You can pretty much tell by somebody's energy if they're really trying to bring you down, or if it was just that what you said happened to cause a little giggle to come out. You can move on from this by just saying, no te rías de mí, don't laugh at me, have a little fun with it. Don't take it too much to heart, especially if these are people that love you, your family, your partner, etc. Hello and welcome to Learn Spanish a lo Boricua. Today, we are reviewing the conversation we had in last episode. Después de 3 años, Puerto Rico me sigue retando. Puerto Rico is still challenging me after 3 years. I talked about my first 3 years here and some goals that I have moving into my 4th year. As always, I recommend that you view today's episode on YouTube. You need the visual piece in order to be retaining the vocab I'm going to be going over today. Okay, so you can put it on YouTube and go do your thing, live your life, be in the car, whatever. Don't do this in the car. Don't look at your phone while driving. In the passenger seat, you could be there doing your thing, but then tap the screen when the words come up so that you can see them. Otherwise, it's just in one ear and out the other. I do this every single day. I teach students vocab on the spot, and unless they see it written down, it's in one ear, out the other. Please check it out on YouTube. Give it a like on YouTube. Leave a comment. That helps get this podcast out there to more people. If you're enjoying what I'm doing, if you appreciate the work I'm putting into this, help me get it out to more people. Subscribe on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a 5-star rating in Apple, respond to some more questions in Spotify. You know the drill. You guys are social media trained at this point. What we'll be going over today, I'm going to start with what I'm considering standard vocab. I mean, this is absolutely vocab that's used in Puerto Rico, but it's not Puerto Rico specific. It's Spanish, period. But good vocab to have. Then we'll jump into some slang, very much PR specific. And I've got one grammar example to go over with you guys at the end. All right, my first set of words that came up and talking about my first couple of years and my first 3 years here, and then looking into my 4th year, I started talking about una meta que tengo para el cuarto año. Una meta. Meta is a goal, not as in sports, not the kind you score, but the kind you set for yourself, okay? Una meta, feminine, goal. Next, you really need this adjective, guys, again, for the language learning process. It's just as important as no entendí, I didn't get it, no te rías de mí. Now we need to talk about the word cohibida. I used it as cohibida, obviously, because I was talking about myself. It's an adjective, so it works like any adjectives in Spanish. It can be cohibido for masculine, cohibidos, cohibidas, cohibida, etc. Okay, this word is used to describe feeling self-conscious, feeling inhibited, a little bit awkward, a little bit shy. Okay, basically the exact emotions that we go through when we try to speak in our second language, right? So cohibirse is the verb here. It's to become inhibited, right? To become self-conscious or shy, to kind of inhibit oneself, etc. Notice that this is a reflexive verb. That's why it has the se on there. Me canso ya de hablar de los verbos reflexivos. Me canso is another reflexive verb, and it means I get tired. I get tired talking about so many reflexive verbs. If you have not taken a look at my live class, which is on my platform, it's $25 a month. You can sign up for a month if you'd like to take some of those classes and then cancel your subscription. That's fine. If that's all you need it for, not going to hurt me. Spanish with Carrie platform, it's always linked in the podcast description, and I have multiple live classes on reflexive verbs. You absolutely need them to express yourself in Spanish and to understand spoken Spanish, okay? So, and written, obviously, just Spanish, period, I could have said. So you can't get around them. Please make sure that you have looked into reflexive verbs. And so this would be, I think I used it in the podcast as me cohibía. I put it in the past tense, right? That se needs to turn into me when I'm talking about myself. Me cohibía, I used to become more inhibited, right? I was talking about this characteristic, particularly in my first year here, right? I even committed an error. That's how we say it in Spanish. Cometí un error. I made a mistake in Spanish with this. I said, estaba, but we'll talk about that later. Era un poquito más cohibida al principio, right? I was a little bit more self-conscious, a little bit shy, a little kind of withdrawn, inhibited at the beginning. Notice that these words have a silent H. Just ignore it. There should be a nice flow between the O and I sound, cohibida. There's no break that happens just because the H is there, right? The word pillow, almohada, has an H in there. You wouldn't know because that O-ah sound just makes a moi, almohada. There's no pause that's needed for the H sound, right? Very important ones to have in the language learning process because you will feel this when you go to speak in Spanish. Me cohibo, I get inhibited, right? Or me cohibía. At some point you'll get past that and it'll be in the past. Alrighty, the word catarro came up in this episode, and I'm so glad it did. This is the way that you say a cold in Puerto Rico, right? Un catarro, un catarro. A cold is in a sickness, right? Tanto así, so much so that you would even in la farmacia, en los rótulos encima de los pasillos, right, on the signs above the aisles, you'll see catarro for the cough, the cold medicine section, okay? Un catarro is how you say cold in PR. Alfredo was talking about his friend who went to the hospital. She had un catarro y una fiebre, and a fever, and she was waiting for more than 3 hours. She had put in her story, they don't take me back soon, I'm gonna leave. And then 2 stories later, se fue. She left. She said, me quedo con el catarro y la fiebre que tengo. Me quedo con, I'll stick with the cold and fever that I have. Catarro. All right, hablando de eso, we were getting into the place of things that are a little bit challenging in PR, medical things being hard, sometimes the lines being a challenge as well. So la fila. Fila means line, not the kind you draw, not online. I'm talking about the kind you stand in, una fila. Okay, and it also refers to a row, as in of seats. So if you were in the first row of seats, you would say, estoy en la primera fila. La primera fila, the first row. The way to make line and turn it into to stand in line is by using the verb hacer. Okay, to stand in line in Spanish is going to be hacer fila. Hacer fila. In Spain and in Cuba, they use cola, I think, instead of fila. Okay, so you will hear cola in other places, but this is in Spanish Lo Boricua, and here they use fila. Okay, you'll hear people, you're around on the island and you're out doing some shopping, and people are wondering if you're in the line. They're going to say to you, está en la fila. Está en la fila. Are you in line? Okay, to stand in line, hacer fila. You will even hear some native Spanish speakers say in English that they made a line, right? Because they're back translating from Spanish into English. They're using what they know, the way to say this in their native languages, which is to make a line. It translates as to stand in line. So, estaba haciendo fila. I was in line. Estaba haciendo fila. Present tense, estoy haciendo fila. I'm in line. Okay. I am making line. All right, and finally, this verb down here, another reflexive verb, the phrase toparse con. Toparse con, very important phrase for you guys. This is how you would express to come across or to run into somebody. So if you wanted to say, I ran into her at the grocery store, me topé con ella en el supermercado. This had just come up in a class with a student, shout out Jessica. And I love it because whenever we learn, this has been my experience, when I learn vocab in Spanish, I end up seeing it 100 times over the next week or so when I think, wow, how long have I been missing this word? So I was talking to her about the phrase toparse con, and that's a great way to express, to run into, or to come across somebody. And then the next day I was working on the transcript for our conversation, and Alfredo, sure enough, had used it in the episode. He used it in this context. Yo me he topado, y tú también, con tal vez algún bartender o algún mesero, mesera, bien buena gente. So he's saying here we're looking at the tense of have done. That's called the present perfect. The present perfect is how you express have done something. I've heard of that. We've been there. He's made that recipe before. Okay, have done something is the present perfect tense, and that's what he used here. I have run into, and you as well, a bartender or a waiter, a waitress. It's really good people, good person, provides excellent service, etc. Okay, excellent phrase, very practical. The stuff on this slide is really excellent vocab that will help you express yourself better, and it's not, stuff that's out there, things that you will really use conversationally. Okay, a couple more that I would say standard vocab. Las cosas cotidianas. Las cosas cotidianas. I use this, again, referring to some of my frustration as far as haciendo fila, standing in line in PR. I used, even in day-to-day things, the way you express that would be las cosas cotidianas, okay? Cotidiana means like day-to-day, every day, kind of daily. So I threw in this picture here. Daily life would be la vida cotidiana. Cotidiana, right? Las cosas cotidianas. Your daily, every day, day-to-day is the feel with cotidiana. Excellent word for you guys to have. Las cosas cotidianas, your day-to-day things. Okay. I wanted to try, always in the search for elevating my vocab and trying to reach for words that I have in there, but I use a little bit less frequently. So I pulled out the word los trámites, which is a little bit more of a formal way to say processes. It's like procedures or processes. And you'll hear even in the episode that I had to double check trámites, and he said, sí, proceso, right? Let me give you a good example of where you would see trámites. If you move to PR and you have to go to El Seco, which is the Puerto Rican DMV, they would refer to any of your processes there, as far as getting your driver's license, registering your car, et cetera, would all be trámites, los trámites en Seco. So it's a little bit more, I would say, definitely formal. You can certainly use procesos, but I was just trying to expandir un poco, spread out and get into some lesser used vocab. Trámite, certainly can use proceso. All right, I said it's another one of my errors from this episode is that I put this in masculine. It is a feminine noun, una traba. In the episode, I said unos trabos. That's not a thing. Okay, una traba is an obstacle. All right, and I was looking at this word and looking at some examples, and a lot of the examples used it just how I used it in the episode, that I used it alongside with barrera. Okay, unas trabas, okay, I was talking about in the first year between the mask and the plastic that they had up at the places between you and your cashier, and me being in my first year here and trying to get my Spanish up, I had all of these obstacles, these barriers to understanding, right? So una traba, trabas y barreras. You could put those together if you wanted to kind of, have some association of what that is. Una traba, an obstacle. Last two super essential phrases before we get into some slang. Fuera de eso. Fuera de eso means aside from that or other than that. Right? I think I was talking about, maybe in the context of exactly this, some of the challenges I have with doing diligencias, errands, las cosas cotidianas, standing in line, etc. But I said outside of that, other than that, okay? Fuera de eso. Excellent phrase. Make sure you write that down. Or, as you know, sorry por la motora. As you know, we now have Quizlet decks of all the vocab that I go over in today's episode is going to be in a ready-made Quizlet deck for you, posted in our Patreon page. You have a fresh deck for every episode, every one of our class episodes where I go through the vocab. It's all the work's done for you. Just follow the link, open up a deck, and start practicing. Okay, fuera de eso. $5 a month gets you access to all the vocab as well as our transcripts of the conversation episodes. Last phrase, a pesar de que, which you might hear in Puerto Rico as a pesar, right? The L, a pesar de que, is despite the fact, or even though. So Alfredo was commenting on even though, or despite the fact that things weren't necessarily easy for me at the beginning, that I've not quit, I've not given up, right? So thanks, baby, appreciate that. It's true. A pesar de que, despite the fact that, even though, blah, blah. Okay, time to talk about some slang. Some fun slang from last episode. Starting off with Alfredo translated this line right there on the spot in the conversation. He said, you know, the cultural shock things that were, he said, you just had to accept, I have to deal with this. Tengo que bregar con esto. Tengo que bregar con esto means I have to deal with this. Okay? Bregar is a verb that means it's used in Puerto Rico and also some other countries that means to deal with something, or it's kind of to struggle. There is a podcast, if you guys have found me, then I'm sure that you found a podcast where I think the name of the podcast is La Brega. If it's not the whole name of the podcast, it's definitely the name of the first episode. That podcast is extremely well done. It's done in English and in Spanish. You can listen to it, and they go into a deep dive about the word bregar, La Brega, its cultural significance, and I could not do it nearly as much justice as they did in that episode. So if you have not looked, just go ahead and look up La Brega podcast, Puerto Rico, something along those lines, and I'm sure it will come up. If you want to learn a little bit more about Brega, also it'll help you kind of understand some more, like I said, the cultural significance or what's happening, more understanding of the culture in general. Okay. The next two, un peo, mi gente, is a fart. That is absolutely what it means. But it's also slang for really anything that sucks. A mess, a complicated situation. I wrote a shit show, but I feel like just if you could translate this as something that sucks, es un peo, and you would get it perfectly. Your English brain would wrap around this perfectly. First of all, side note, in other countries, this will be pedo with a D. It's not in PR. Do not pronounce it pedo. It's not said that way. Un peo. Okay, un peo is the word. So a couple examples. I talked about, medical stuff. That was where I dropped this line after Alfredo gave the example of his friend who was waiting to be taken back, and then she ended up leaving. And I said, "Sí, porque es un peo," because it sucks. It's a mess, right? Another one, a neighbor here in our apartment building, she was moving out, and me topé con ella en el parking. Me topé con ella. I ran into her in the parking lot in our garage as she was bringing her stuff down. And I said, we were chatting back and forth, and I was like, la mudanza es un peo. La mudanza es un peo. Moving sucks. La mudanza means moving, the noun, moving. Can you help me with moving? Right? So mudanza es un peo. She was like, not just see. We all know that. Okay. Think of moving, think of, having to wait a long time, think of whatever, anything that sucks. Un peo. And then Sangano. I'm really surprised that this is the first time this has come up in this podcast, because Alfredo and I use this every single day with each other. Like all slang, it's largely dependent on your tone, right? The context that's going on, or about whether that slang is offensive or not. Just the other week in my platform, a student shared that she needed a translation for ratchet, but she needed it to not be offensive. Well, calling someone ratchet in English can be very offensive or not. Depends on context, tone, the relationship you already have with that person, right? So sangano, I think, is a really good example of that. Sangano, sangana. It's often said with amor, mi gente. Alfredo and I use it all the time, and the equivalent that I've even explained to him is, at least in my experience in English, is like how we would say, "You're an idiot." You're an idiot. When you're talking to your partner, your family, whatever, friend of yours, and they just say something ridiculous, you're an idiot. But you're not, it's not an insult. You say it with love, you're kind of joking. It's silly. That's what sangano a lot of times feels like. Of course, in a different context, if you have a different relationship with a person and you call them un sangano, it can absolutely be a fool, moron, you idiot. And you can say it with, just like you use idiot, right? The way I just said it, you idiot. Right? Just that tone that I put behind it changes the meaning completely versus saying you're an idiot, right? Most of the time, sangano is like, sangano. I threw it at the end because I said, you know, I'm happy that I met you. And of course, if it was just he and I wouldn't have needed to follow it with something like to kind of lighten it, but we were recording a podcast, you know, that people are going to listen to. So I think I put it in there kind of to lighten the mood, right? Sangano, sangana. This comes from the bee whose sole purpose in life is to mate with the queen bee and then falls to the ground and dies. Okay, so that's where it comes from. Sangano is a bee. I already told you guys about this one earlier when I was talking about cohibida. I use estar. I feel like I didn't quite know where I was going with this sentence when I started it. But saying tímida or cohibida is a ser type of quality. So that should have been era. Again, native speakers also will sometimes start with estar and then have to switch, or start with por and then have to switch to para. The thing is that they do it automatically because there's no, you know, it's just intuitive. Once they know the next thing they're going to say, they switch to and correct themselves, which we talked about before, correcting yourself. Finally, guys, all right, stay with me. This was a huge aha moment for me and a huge realization about how reflexive verbs work specifically in expressing emotions. So we're going to look at the difference between me frustro and me frustra. Okay, when this is reflexive, this is not. Why is this reflexive? Because the same person doing the action, yo, is receiving the action, me. Hence reflexive, it's like a reflection, okay? So I'm both doing the frustrating and receiving the frustrating, you can see it. This would translate to, I get frustrated. So think about how often we use get with emotions. I get bored, I get tired, I get frustrated, I get angry, okay? All of those are gonna be expressed with a reflexive verb for that emotion, me frustro. I get frustrated, me canso, I get tired, me aburro, I get bored, right? Versus saying that something frustrates you. Here, I'm not the one doing the action. Something else caused me this emotion, okay? I get frustrated versus it frustrates me. Something frustrates me, okay? What I missed the con, which was a crucial part of the sentence structure in the conversation. To say I get frustrated with the customer service in PR, it would sound like me frustro con el servicio al cliente in PR. If I wanted to flip that, instead of saying I get a little frustrated with that, if I say customer service in Puerto Rico frustrates me, then it would sound like me frustra el servicio al cliente en PR. Right now, I'm putting the verb into el, ella, usted, or it. That's that third person group. When you're looking at your conjugation chart, that also is for it, right? You say it can, it's puede ser, it can be. Okay, so it, the servicio al cliente, is what frustrates me, okay? It's almost like you're putting a little bit more blame when you do it this way versus saying, we're kind of putting it on you, right? It's an internal thing that's happening. I get frustrated with versus the customer service frustrates me, right? Okay, I already talked about me aburro, but just to look at another example, me aburro, when it's reflexive, I get so bored, me aburro mucho en el trabajo. I get so bored at work. Or if I make the job the cause of my boredom, I'm going to say, este trabajo me aburre. It bores me. This job bores me versus I get bored. I get super bored at work. That was a big aha moment for me when I realized that subtle difference and how it changes what you're expressing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow me on Instagram and on TikTok. I'm putting out some videos right now with Bad Bunny's new album, which I'm loving, going over some things you can learn from that album, from the lyrics, etc. So check that out. Those will be on my TikTok and Instagram. The link for Patreon is right there in the podcast description. Remember, $5 a month will get you access to all of the vocab that I go over in the class episodes, ready-made on flashcards for you. You can verify that you're studying the right thing, the right kind of vocab from PR. And it also give you the transcripts of our conversations. Okay, hasta la próxima, mi gente.